The lost princess. Captain Eric stood in the dimly lit room, staring at the holographic map in front of him. The galaxy had been torn apart by war, and yet one mission had brought him back into the heart of it all. The princess, Lyra of the Valorian Empire, had been taken by the enemy. Her mother, Queen Lyra, had sent a desperate message through every channel, begging for anyone to rescue her daughter. Eric knew the stakes. The Valorians were one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, but they were vulnerable to the enemies they had made in the past. The princess's capture had shaken the empire to its core. If Eric failed, it wouldn't just be the princess who was lost. The empire itself could fall apart. He clenched his fists, a cold resolve settling over him. Eric had seen death, destruction, and chaos in his years of service. But this was different. This was about something more. He wasn't just fighting for a cause or a mission. He was fighting for a life, for a future that could change everything. The mission was simple. Infiltrate the enemy's fortress on the jungle, planet of Piro 9, find the princess, and bring her back alive. But nothing about this was simple. The fortress was a massive, heavily guarded installation on the outskirts of the planet's largest city. The Valorians had tried to rescue her before, but their efforts had failed. Eric's team was their last hope. "Captain, the ship is ready," his comms officer, Lieutenant Sarah, said from behind him. She was always calm, always collected, and Eric appreciated that. He gave her a small nod before turning to face her. "Let's make sure we don't fail," Eric replied. His voice was steady, but the weight of the mission pressed down on him. He had seen too many people die in his line of work to take anything for granted. The princess's mother had already lost so much. He couldn't let her lose her daughter. As the team made their way to the shuttle bay, Eric couldn't help but think of the message the Queen had sent. She had called for help, and he had answered. But there was more than duty pushing him forward. Eric had seen the pain in the Queen's eyes, the desperation in her voice. He had seen the strength of her love for her daughter, and he knew that, whatever it took, he couldn't fail. The shuttle lifted off, leaving the safety of the human fleet behind. The stars outside the window seemed distant, cold, and indifferent, as if the universe itself had stopped caring about the fate of one small princess. But Eric didn't care about the stars. He cared about the life of a girl he had never met, and the promise he had made to bring her home. The planet Piro 9 loomed ahead, a dark, forested world with a deadly reputation. Its thick atmosphere and dangerous terrain had made it nearly impossible for any large military force to approach undetected. Eric and his team would have to rely on stealth, something that had never been easy for a squad of soldiers used to battle. As the shuttle descended toward the planet's surface, Eric felt the familiar tension in his chest. His mind raced with plans, strategies, and the worst-case scenarios. The enemy was brutal, and they would stop at nothing to keep the princess. Eric had no illusions about what would happen if they were caught. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud on the forest floor. The team quickly disembarked, moving quietly through the thick underbrush. Eric led the way, his hand resting on the hilt of his pulse rifle. They didn't know exactly where the princess was being held, but they knew it would be somewhere secure, somewhere heavily guarded. Every step they took felt like a ticking clock. The silence of the forest was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of an alien creature. It was as if the world itself was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Eric's eyes scanned the trees, his senses heightened. Every crack of a twig underfoot, every movement in the shadows felt like a threat. But they couldn't afford to stop. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Minutes turned into hours, and still they pressed forward, deeper into the heart of the enemy's territory. The fortress was closer now, and Eric could feel the tension building. His team moved like ghosts, blending into the shadows, their presence unnoticed by the enemy. But with every step, the danger grew. Finally, they reached the outer wall of the fortress. Eric knew they were getting close. They had one chance, one opportunity to do this right. If they failed, there would be no second chances. As he signaled for the team to stop, he felt a strange chill run down his spine. They were about to enter the belly of the beast, and Eric couldn't help but wonder, would he be able to save the princess in time? Or would he, like so many others before him, fall short? The prisoners of the Empire. Eric's pulse quickened. As he crouched behind a thick tree, the fortress looming in front of him like a monstrous shadow. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was the moment that would define everything. His team was scattered, moving silently in the darkness, each one positioned to breach the fortress. But Eric wasn't focused on the mission details. His mind was on one thing, the princess. The last message from Queen Alira still rang in his ears. Bring my daughter home. He couldn't fail her. He wouldn't fail her. Eric motioned for the team to move forward. They had reached the outer perimeter of the enemy fortress, a vast structure built into the side of a cliff. Its walls were reinforced with steel, and Eric knew it'd take a direct hit to break through them. But that wasn't the plan. They would slip in unnoticed, using the enemy's overconfidence against them. Steady, everyone, Eric whispered into his comms. We're about to enter enemy territory. Silence is our ally. The team, well-trained and disciplined, moved with precision. They crossed a bridge made of cracked stone, entering the shadows beneath the fortress's thick walls. Eric could feel the tension in the air. Every breath was calculated, every movement deliberate. They couldn't afford to make a sound. The entrance was just ahead, a rusted metal door, guarded by 2 sentinels. They were humanoid but unervingly still, their faces hidden behind featureless helmets. Eric's hand tightened around his rifle. The plan was simple. Neutralize the guards, enter the fortress, and find Lyra. As his team took position, Eric watched the guards. They were too comfortable, too unaware of the threat creeping closer. The first soldier moved. Eric's breath held as he pressed his back against the wall. A soft, almost imperceptible click of his rifle's safety echoed in the still night. Then, within a heartbeat, the silence was shattered. The first guard crumpled to the ground without a sound, a swift strike to the neck from Lieutenant Sarah. The second guard barely had time to react before Eric's own shot took him down. Clear, Sarah whispered into the comms, and the team moved in. The door opened silently, a thick gust of cold air rushing into the night. Inside the fortress was a maze of dark corridors and reinforced chambers. Eric's heart pounded in his chest as he led his team deeper into the belly of the enemy's stronghold. Each step was fraught with danger. Every corner they turned could lead to an ambush. Eric had been in enough tight spots to know that the enemy would be ready for them, but he didn't care. He couldn't afford to think about failure. This was about Lyra, about the hope that her return could bring back some semblance of peace to the galaxy. After what felt like hours, the team reached the heart of the fortress, a large, fortified chamber with high walls, each covered in alien symbols and jagged metal. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. This was where the princess was being held, but something felt off. Eric stopped, holding up a hand to signal the team. He listened intently. No guards, no sounds of movement. Only the low hum of power systems, and the occasional distant clang of metal. It didn't add up. He motioned for Sarah to scout ahead. As she moved silently through the shadows, Eric's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. The silence was unnerving. Where was everyone? Why hadn't they already been spotted? Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the fortress, cutting through the stillness. The walls shook with the sound, and Eric's heart skipped a beat. Breach! Sarah's voice crackled in his earpiece, sharp with urgency. We've triggered the security system. We're not alone anymore. Eric's stomach tightened. The clock was ticking. They needed to move fast. He turned to his team, his mind racing. Sarah, find the princess. Everyone else, hold off the enemy. We can't let them recapture her. The team split, each member, slipping into the shadows, blending with the chaos of the fortress. Eric knew that the next few minutes would decide everything. His mind went back to the Queen's face when she had begged him for help, her strength, her fear, her love for her daughter. Eric couldn't fail now. Not when they were so close. He made his way down another corridor, heart pounding in his chest. The walls were lined with thick steel doors. His hand reached out, pushing open the first one with careful precision. Inside, he found what he feared the most. The room was empty. No princess. Eric's throat tightened. His mind screamed in panic. They had been so close, so certain. Where could she be? He couldn't think about it for long. The enemy was closing in. He couldn't let them win. Not now. Eric, Sarah's voice came through his comms, sounding strained. I've found her. She's locked in a high-security cell on the upper levels. We're moving now, but we've got company. Eric nodded grimly. We're coming to you. Hold tight, Lyra. Help is on the way. The rescue. Eric's heart beat louder than the echoing footsteps of his team. The mission had already gone sideways, and they hadn't even reached the princess yet. The fortress, once quiet and methodical, was now alive with a deep rumbling. As the alarm blared louder, announcing their intrusion to anyone within earshot. The enemy would be coming in force, and time was no longer on their side. Captain, Sarah's voice crackled through the comms again, her tone tight with stress. We've got movement on the upper levels. They're trying to lock us out. Eric gritted. His teeth. We won't be stopped. He motioned for his team to stay low as they moved through the winding corridors, the distant sound of enemy soldiers echoing down the halls. Every shadow felt alive with potential danger, but Eric kept his focus. This was it, the final stretch. The princess was so close, and so was the possibility of failure. They reached the staircase, a dark, twisting structure that led up toward the high-security wing of the fortress. Each step felt heavier than the last as Eric's thoughts raced. What if we're too late? His mind battled with doubt, but he refused to let it show. He had to remain focused for Lyra, for the mission, for the galaxy itself. As they ascended, Eric's sharp eyes caught the faintest movement, a shadow darting in the corner of his vision. Before he could react, Sarah was already in position, her pulse rifle aimed at the dark figure. The figure stepped into the light, revealing the unmistakable features of an alien soldier, tall, armored, and furious. It lunged toward them, its weapon raised. Take it down. Eric shouted. The team moved in perfect synchronization, their weapons spitting deadly bursts of energy. The enemy soldier fell with a resounding thud, its body crumpling to the floor. But it was just the beginning. Eric knew the alarm would have alerted every soldier in the fortress. They had mere moments before reinforcements arrived. Move! Eric barked. We're almost there. They sprinted down the final corridor, their footsteps loud against the cold metal floors. As they approached the high-security section, a series of thick steel doors loomed ahead, each one sealed with a high-tech locking system. The control panels glowed faintly in the dim light, mocking them with their complexity. This is it, Eric muttered under his breath. Let's make it count. Sarah immediately got to work, her hands flying over the control panel. The seconds felt like hours, but finally, with a quiet click, the massive door slid open. Beyond it, Eric saw the princess for the first time, a figure clad in tattered clothing, sitting on the cold floor, her back pressed against the wall. Her golden hair shimmered in the dim light, her face pale but fierce. Lyra's eyes met his, a flicker of hope burning within them, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mouth was dry, and her body frail from days or perhaps weeks of captivity. "Lyra!" Sarah called, her voice a breath of relief. The princess's eyes widened, and for the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to hope. Eric stepped forward, his voice steady and calm, despite the urgency clawing at him. "We're getting you out of here." Lyra nodded, slowly rising to her feet. Her legs were shaky, but she found the strength to stand. The moment she moved, however, the floor beneath them trembled, and a loud mechanical hiss filled the room. The air was thick with the stench of burned circuitry, and Eric's heart sank as he realized what was happening. "They've locked us in," Sarah shouted, her fingers furiously working to try and override the system. But the control panel was already flashing red. They were trapped. Suddenly, the walls began to pulse with bright alien lights. A deep, unsettling voice echoed through the intercom system. "Intruders detected. Initiating containment protocol. Sarah, get us out of here." Eric snapped, his voice a low growl. Sarah's eyes were frantic, but her hands remained steady on the panel. "I'm trying. It's going to take a few more seconds." Eric glanced around, assessing their dwindling options. The fortress was alive with the sound of approaching footsteps, and he knew they didn't have much time. The enemy was closing in, and they would stop at nothing to prevent Lyra's escape. Then he saw it, a narrow ventilation shaft above them, hidden just under the high ceiling. If they could reach it, they could escape through the fortress's vast internal air ducts. It wasn't ideal, but it was their only shot. "Lyra, can you climb?" Eric asked quickly. Lyra nodded, though her face was etched with fear and uncertainty. She was exhausted, broken even, but there was a fire in her eyes that Eric recognized. She wasn't giving up, not yet. "I'll boost you up," he said. His mind was already working 100 steps ahead, knowing the enemy would come charging through those doors any second. Without waiting for a response, Eric positioned himself beneath the shaft. He extended his arms toward Lyra, his eyes locking with hers. "We're getting you out. Trust me." She took a deep breath, nodding once more. Eric placed his hands on her waist, lifting her effortlessly, despite the growing noise of enemy soldiers pouring into the hallway. The minutes felt like a lifetime, but finally, Lyra reached the vent and pulled herself inside. "Go!" Eric barked. "Hurry!" One by one, the rest of the team followed, scrambling up into the ventilation shaft, each member disappearing into the shadows. Eric was the last to climb, but just as he was about to reach the opening, the door behind them exploded open. Eric's pulse spiked. It was too late to go back. With a final push, he pulled himself up and into the shaft, his body sliding through the narrow tunnels. As he heard the enemy soldiers scream in fury behind him, he knew that the most dangerous part of the mission was yet to come. But they were one step closer. The escape. The ventilation shaft was cramped, barely wide enough for Eric to fit through without scraping against the metal sides. The air was thick with dust, and the oppressive hum of the fortress's life support systems vibrated through the walls, making everything feel claustrophobic. Every minute in the shaft felt like an eternity, but there was no time to waste. The enemy would be on them soon, and they had to move fast. Eric crawled forward, his mind spinning with possibilities. The labyrinth of ducts twisted and turned, the walls cold against his skin. He could hear the princess's breathing just ahead of him, her fragile form moving slowly but surely through the narrow path. She had been through hell, but she kept pushing forward, her determination mirrored in the way she held herself. The team moved as one, but there was no room for chatter. Every so often, Eric would hear a muffled footstep or a faint metallic clang from somewhere in the distance, reminding him that the fortress was a giant maze with no safe corners. There were no guarantees. "We're almost there," Sarah's voice broke the silence. The urgency in her tone was unmistakable. "We've located an exit point just past the eastern sector. We're running out of time." Eric nodded, though she couldn't see him. His heart pounded in his chest, and sweat beaded on his brow. A tension had been building ever since the team entered the ventilation shaft. Each sound, each shadow, felt like it could be the end. But they couldn't stop not now, not when they were so close. The narrow passage opened up into a larger chamber, the metallic walls painted with symbols Eric didn't recognize. The area was eerily quiet almost. Too quiet. The team stopped in their tracks, and Eric held up a fist, signaling for them to be still. His ears were straining, listening for any sign of movement. A muffled voice echoed from the far side of the chamber. Eric's instincts flared, and he pressed himself against the cold walls, motioning for the others to do the same. His breath caught in his throat as he realized the unmistakable sound of footsteps was getting closer. The enemy was on the move. They had to move fast. "Go," Eric whispered harshly. "We don't have much time." Sarah led the way, her movements fluid and quick. Eric followed, keeping his hand on his weapon, ready for anything. They slipped through the shadows, silently moving toward their exit. Lyra, still weak from her captivity, struggled to keep up, but she didn't falter. Eric kept an eye on her, his heart aching as he watched her steady determination. Just as they neared the exit, the faintest sound of a door sliding open reached Eric's ears. The sharp click of boots on metal floors sent a chill down his spine. The soldiers were closer now, and the air was thick with tension. He cursed under his breath. "Stay low," Eric ordered, his voice barely a whisper. They crouched, moving silently through the shadows. The enemy soldiers were only a few feet away now, their figures barely visible in the dim light. Eric's grip on his pulse rifle tightened. If they were spotted, there would be no escape. The team remained motionless, each breath feeling like a drumbeat in the silence. Eric's heart raced. He knew if they were caught now, it would all be over. They couldn't afford to make a single sound. Suddenly, the soldiers turned and walked in the opposite direction, their attention focused elsewhere. Eric let out a quiet breath of relief, but didn't allow himself to relax. He knew better than to think the danger was over. They were still deep inside enemy territory, and one wrong move could undo everything. As they neared the exit, Eric could see the faint outline of a maintenance door, barely visible in the darkness. The plan was simple: get through the door and make their way to the surface, where an evac shuttle would be waiting. But there was one problem. The door was locked, and the countdown clock was ticking. "Sarah, can you get it open?" Eric asked, his voice tight with urgency. Sarah stepped forward, her fingers flying over the panel. "I'll try, but it might take a minute," she said, her tone betraying her nerves. Eric looked back toward the direction they had come from. The faint sounds of movement from enemy soldiers could still be heard. They wouldn't have long. The seconds felt like hours as Sarah worked on the door's lock. Eric's mind raced. Come on. Finally. A soft beep echoed through the chamber, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. "Done," Sarah said, her voice laced with relief. Eric motioned for Lyra and the rest of the team to move quickly. They rushed through the open door and into the dimly lit corridor beyond. The cool air felt like a balm against their tense skin, but Eric knew it wasn't safe yet. The fortress might be crumbling around them, but there were still dangers ahead. "Let's move," Eric barked, keeping the pace steady as they pushed forward. As they rounded the corner, Eric's heart stopped. A group of enemy soldiers stood at the far end of the hall, blocking their only exit. "Get down." Eric hissed. The team scattered, ducking behind the nearest cover. Eric peeked around the corner, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. They were outnumbered, and their position wasn't ideal. But they didn't have a choice. It was now or never. Eric's hand hovered over his weapon. The decision was made in an instant. He sprang forward, pulse rifle raised. The first soldier fell before he even had a chance to react. The team followed suit, their weapons flashing as they picked off the enemies one by one. Lyra, though still weak, gripped a sidearm tightly in her hand, proving her strength once again. "Keep moving," Eric yelled as the last enemy soldier crumpled to the ground. They dashed toward the exit, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hall. As they reached the surface, the moonlight bathed them in cold light. The evac shuttle was waiting, its engines humming softly, ready to whisk them away from the nightmare they had just escaped. Eric exhaled, the weight of the mission finally lifting. But they weren't safe yet. They still had to leave the planet, and the enemy would be relentless in their pursuit. He didn't care. They were alive. Lyra was alive. "Let's go," he said quietly, his voice filled with quiet triumph. They climbed into the shuttle, and as the door closed behind them, Eric took one last look at the fortress below. The mission wasn't over. The galaxy was still at war, but for now they had won. And that would have to be enough. Asterisk, the reunion. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting them away from the planet's surface, Eric let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They were off Piro 9, still alive, still moving. The fortress, now nothing more than a distant shadow against the burning horizon, was behind them, but it felt like the weight of that place would stay with him for a long time. Lyra sat across from him in the shuttle, her body wrapped in a thick blanket to keep her warm, though the chill in her eyes wasn't from the cold. She was still processing everything, still uncertain of where she fit in the galaxy after everything that had happened. Eric couldn't blame her. The last few weeks had been nothing short of a nightmare for her. Captured, isolated, and then rescued by a stranger who had made a promise to her mother. There was no way she could understand everything that had transpired in the short time they'd known each other. "How are you holding up?" Eric asked softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Lyra looked at him, her pale face a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. Her eyes, once filled with fear and uncertainty, were now starting to show a flicker of something else. Relief, perhaps, or maybe it was trust. Eric wasn't sure, but he could feel the change. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the shuttle's engines. "I never thought I'd see my mother again. I never thought I'd be free." Eric nodded, unable to put words to the weight of her statement. He knew what it felt like to be lost, to lose everything. But this was something else entirely. He had fought wars, battled enemies, faced insurmountable odds. But he had never faced the kind of loss that someone like Lyra had endured. He looked away for a moment, his thoughts a swirl of memories of his own family, of the friends he had lost. The galaxy was a vast, brutal place, and no one was safe from its violence. But he had to push those thoughts aside. This wasn't about him. This was about Lyra, about her mother, about their future. "Your mother will be waiting for you," he said, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of unspoken promises. "She be proud of you. You're stronger than you realize." Lyra's lips quivered as she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm not strong. I was terrified. I wanted to give up. There were times when I didn't think I could make it." Eric leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "That's what makes you strong. Not the fact that you didn't feel fear, but that you pushed through it. You're not the only one who's been afraid. We all have our moments." The silence between them grew, but this time it wasn't as heavy. There was understanding in the space between their words. Eric wasn't sure how much comfort he could offer, but for now, he was doing his best. The shuttle continued its journey, its engines humming in the background, but outside, the stars seemed to blur together in a beautiful, vast tapestry. For a brief moment, it almost felt like they were the only two people in the universe, lost in the stillness of space, with the weight of the past behind them and an uncertain future ahead. Then the comms buzzed. Captain Eric, Sarah's voice, came through the shuttle's speakers, sharp and clear. "We're approaching the Valorian flagship. Get ready." Eric nodded, already standing and motioning for the rest of the team to prepare. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide. Are we there?" she asked, her voice trembling with something he couldn't quite place anticipation. "Hope? We're almost there," Eric said, offering a reassuring smile. "And when we land, your mother will be waiting." Lyra's face softened as she took in his words. There was a spark in her eyes now, something that had been absent before. Maybe it was the recognition of safety, or the knowledge that she was finally going home. The shuttle's landing gear extended with a soft hiss, and as they neared the flagship, a sense of finality began to settle over Eric. He had done what he came to do. He had kept his promise. The princess was safe. The shuttle touched down gently on the flagship's landing pad. The door hissed open, and the team filed out, Lyra leading the way. Eric followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The flagship was a massive vessel, elegant, imposing, a symbol of the Valorian Empire's power and legacy. And there, standing at the base of the ramp, was Queen Alira. Her eyes locked with Lyra's the moment she stepped out of the shuttle, and a surge of emotion passed between them. It was a look of relief, of love, and of everything that had been lost and regained in the space of a few short hours. Lyra ran toward her mother, her legs unsteady but her heart full. Queen Alira's arms opened wide as she embraced her daughter, lifting her off her feet as tears filled both their eyes. The queen's voice cracked as she spoke, barely a whisper. "You came back to me. You came back." Lyra didn't respond at first. She simply clung to her mother, as if the very act of being held would make everything from the past weeks disappear. But after a long moment, she pulled away just slightly and looked up at her mother with teary eyes. "I didn't think I would," Lyra whispered. "I didn't think I would ever see you again." "You're here now," Queen Alira replied, her voice filled with warmth. "You're safe, and we'll never be apart again." Eric stood at the side, watching this reunion unfold, and for the first time in a long while, something inside him shifted. It wasn't the kind of victory he was used to, the kind he was trained for. This was different. This was something far more profound. The princess had been lost. But now, she was found. And as the queen and her daughter embraced once more, Eric knew one thing for sure. No matter how dark the galaxy became, there would always be moments like this. Moments where love, hope, and family triumphed over everything else. For now, that was enough. A new hope. The Valorian flagship was a magnificent sight, a floating testament to the Empire's ancient glory. Its pristine corridors and towering spires seemed almost unreal after the chaotic horrors of Piero 9. As the reunion between Lyra and Queen Alira continued, Eric couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they had just survived. They had faced unimaginable odds, but now, in the quiet aftermath, there was peace. For the moment, at least. Eric stood near the edge of the landing bay, his back to the bustling activity of the royal guards and crew members who had gathered to watch the reunion. His gaze drifted to the stars beyond, distant and cold, their beauty unchanged by the conflicts below. He had saved the princess, and he had brought her back to her mother, but the galaxy remained in turmoil. This one victory, though meaningful, was just a small fragment of the chaos that still threatened to consume everything. But something inside Eric had shifted, something that had been missing for a long time. In the quiet aftermath of the rescue, he found himself thinking about the future, about what he wanted next. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just a soldier. He was part of something bigger than himself, something that felt right. "Captain Eric?" He turned to find Lyra standing beside him. Her face had lost some of the rawness it had held earlier, the storm of her emotions slowly giving way to the calm that only safety could bring. Her eyes met his, and there was no fear left in them, just determination, a resolve that mirrored his own. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice still quiet but stronger now, more assured. "You didn't just save me. You saved my people, my mother. She would have never stopped searching for me, but I don't think she could have done it alone. I think she knew that, but you ... you did it. You brought me home." Eric looked at her for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had always been the one to act, the one to do what needed to be done, without words or praise. But there was something in her gaze, something that made him feel the weight of his actions in a way he hadn't before. It wasn't just duty that had driven him to save her. It was something more. "I'm just glad you're safe," he replied simply, though the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Lyra smiled, a small, shy curve of her lips that spoke volumes. She looked back toward her mother, still embracing her with quiet joy, their bond now restored. There was no greater gift in this moment. The princess, though burdened by the weight of what had been lost, was finally reunited with her family. "But we're not done yet," Eric said, his voice steady and full of purpose. "The Empire is still at war. You and your mother may be safe, but the threat isn't over." Lyra nodded, her expression hardening as she met his gaze. "I know, and I'm not hiding anymore. Not from the truth, not from what's coming." She had changed. The fear and uncertainty that had defined her before had been replaced with something sharper, a new resolve. "Then you and your mother will need more than safety. You'll need strength," Eric continued, his voice low. "There's always more to the story, more to the fight than what we see on the surface. I've fought wars before, but I know how easily those wars can swallow up everything, even the ones we love. The galaxy's broken, and we can't fix it by running away from the truth." Lyra stepped closer, her posture resolute. "I'll do what it takes. I won't let the Empire fall, and I won't let my people suffer because of our past mistakes. My mother, the Valorians, we will rise." Eric couldn't help but admire her strength. She was no longer the scared princess he had met just hours ago, but a leader, someone who had seen the darkness and refused to be consumed by it. She would be a force to be reckoned with. "If you need anything," he said, his tone firm, "you just need to ask. I owe you that much." "I'll remember that," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. The shuttle doors hissed open, behind them breaking the silence. The moment was over, but it was just the beginning. As they turned back toward the heart of the flagship, the weight of their future loomed in the distance. The war wasn't over, and peace was still an illusion, but in that moment, with Lyra standing beside him, Eric felt a flicker of hope. Hours later, after the reunion had calmed and the initial rush of emotions had settled, Eric found himself once again alone in the quiet corridor of the Valorian flagship. The events of the day seemed to replay in his mind over and over. First the danger, the rescue, the relief of their success, and finally, the moment when he had seen Lyra and her mother embrace. He'd saved her. He had truly saved her. But as he turned the corner toward his quarters, a low, familiar hum from the comms console interrupted his thoughts. It was a secure transmission, one that would only be sent to a select few. The voice that crackled through the comms was unmistakable. Captain Eric, the voice of Admiral Voss rang clear. We've received a distress signal from the Outer Rim. We need you on the front lines now. Eric's heart skipped a beat, but he couldn't ignore the call. His duty was never over. And even though he had brought one princess home, the galaxy was far from done with its wars. Understood, Admiral, Eric replied, his voice steady. I'm on my way. As he walked toward the bridge, Lyra's words echoed in his mind. We will rise. And for the first time in a long while, Eric allowed himself to believe it. Asterisk.